Coming up, Brett Kitching has lived and worked in Ipswich almost all of his life. Approaching 58, he will retire as General Manager of Ipswich Turf Club on March 1st, 2021. You would be hard-pressed to find anyone who knows Bundamba and Ipswich any better. Brett joins Ipswich Today to share his life's journey so far and is this episode's special guest. It's Friday, October 9, 2020, and I'm Alan Roebuck. Welcome to Ipswich Today, which acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land on which it is produced and pays respects to elders past, present and emerging. This podcast is supported by Kinetics, people-powered web hosting trusted by Australian businesses since 1999. Today's special guest is Ipswich local Brett Kitching, who is the well-known manager of Ipswich Turf Club. He is a fifth-generation Ipswichian, and he joins me now. Thanks for chatting with Ipswich Today, Brett.
Yes, I'm pleased to, Al.
Your family history probably mirrors many local families with links to the first coal mines in the district, say around the 1840s and 50s. Where does yours start?
So the Kitching line is way back in Leeds, way back 200 years, more than 200 years ago. They went over a couple of generations. They made their way up to Edinburgh in Scotland as a coal mining family, and from Port of Glasgow travelled out to Maryborough left in 1882, arrived in 1883, and spent a bit of time in Howard up near Maryborough, coal mining, and then moved down to Ipswich, where there was a lot more coal mining happening at the time.
What about your earliest memories of Bundamba? Take us back there through your eyes as a child.
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, having gone to the Bundamba Primary School, so earliest memories, I guess, I going to year one when I was 4 years old. So I can remember the Strive to Succeed sign out the front of the school. There was a velodrome across the road from the school at the time, way back then. Since that time, obviously the pool, the skate park, the football ground had always been there, the soccer football ground, the basketball stadium, all in the 70s, the pool, the basketball stadium, they all arrived. I well and truly remember the floods, so I was a 10-year-old lad at the time, and the floods of 74, and helping to clean out some of the nearby houses after that, which were quite a mess, mud everywhere and a horrible mess. I remember we lived Evervale, so the other side of Bundamba, and driving to the top of the hill and looking out over a sea of water back in 74 as the Bundamba Creek swelled right across the racetrack, across the school, as far as the pub, which has been there since the 1890 as well. From Bundamba Primary up to Bundamba High, played basketball when I was a 13-year-old at the stadium, swam at the pool, and played football across the road, as did my father and grandfather, and a whole bunch of Kitchings before that.
So sport obviously played a big part in your younger days. What did you excel at inside the classroom, particularly after you got to Bundamba High?
Had very good results at Bundamba High. So I remember doing an English essay on my favourite footballer, Pele the God, and his God-given gifts in grade 8 at Bundamba High, and getting a 20 out of 20 for that, and winning the English prize that year. There were 300 kids in each year. There were 1,500 kids at the school. It was full at the time, the Bundamba High School.
Yeah, that's a big school.
But, yes, and maths. Yeah, I did quite well at maths and physical education.
Now, would I be right in saying that you would have been one of the early cohort of students at Bundamba? I think it opened in 1970.
Yeah, that's probably, yeah. I started there in 75.
Right.
I know my brother did in 73. It wasn't a long time before I went there that it was built and opened. I remember an interesting first day up there in grade 8. we were being given an orientation around the schoolyard, and I remember going down to the flat across the road from where they have netball courts down there now, but it was the flat area across the road from the creek and the race course, and I remember seeing the coal mine shaft open and with a few witches' hats around it, saying, everyone has to stay away, all your kids have to stay away from this hole in the ground.
And that was within the school ground?
Yes. It was in the bottom corner. I remember it being there for probably almost 12 months because we walked down the oval to catch the bus. The bus was all caught down there, and we were just told to stay away from that. So it was open. It was obviously a collapsed mine shaft that had resulted from the floods of the previous year. Oh,
workplace health and safety's moved on a little bit since then, Brett.
It has indeed. I actually talking about workplace health and safety. A great uncle, one of the he was a lad that came over on the boat from Scotland, and he was in 1935, and he was 58 or so. He was coal mining, and it was basically underneath the racetrack in that area, in that region, the racetrack and surround. And he was killed by a beam that fell down. So the mine's rescue is very close by. It's over where Rosswell Motors is now. But I actually have the report from that back then when he was killed, and he's one of those on the Miners' Memorial.
Right.
That was Adam Kitching.
Sport plays a big part in Ipswich, and your family has played the world game, football, which we Aussies call soccer. Tell us about your dad and your sporting highlights.
Oh, well, even back further from my dad, so Granddad played for Queensland. He went pretty well. He actually won in 1935 and 37, I think the years were. He actually won the Brisbane Premiership. He was in the Bundamba Rangers team from across the road that won the highest level in Queensland. Then my father, Spencer, so grandfather was Alexander. My father, Spencer, in 1955 for Bundamba Rangers again, he won the Brisbane First Division at the highest level in Queensland again, Premiership. He went on the following year, or that year, 1955, he started playing for Australia. He played 22 games for Australia against a variety of teams from various nations. He toured New Zealand in 1958. So he's the third highest. A lot of soccer footballers from Ipswich who played for Australia around those earlier days, and he was the third highest of the Ipswich footballers. So he was actually bought by Azzurri, the Italian-based team, in 1959 to help them get back into the First Division. He was working in the Ipswich Railway workshops at the time, and he received $20 a game, £20 a game from Azzurri. So that made the mind up to go down there to play.
That would have been a big deal back then.
It was. It divided. There was a huge divide put it in Ipswich football. They're actually in the Queensland Times called almost lepers for leaving Ipswich football to go for the money. But the £20 a match was equivalent. Well, it was actually more than what he was earning a week. He was married the following year started a family, and that money helped a lot. And the next year, probably a dozen or 24 Ipswich internationals or near internationals, state players certainly, that went down to either Azzurri, the Italian club, Hellenic, the Greek club, or Hollandia, the Dutch club. The following year, there's a mass exodus from Ipswich, and Ipswich football was probably in the doldrums a bit from during that time through the 60s and 70s. We got to the 80s, and I managed to the one time that an Ipswich side won the top division. Well, it's the only time since the 50s that an Ipswich side has won the top league in Queensland, and I was in that side that was in 1985. How
many years were you playing, Brett?
All together, I guess I started in the 60s and finished in 1969 as a 6-year-old, and finished as an over 35 in 2011.
Oh, old fella. Yeah, right.
Yes, that's right. That's exactly what we called ourselves, the oldies.
Let's talk about your early working life. What was your first job?
My first business probably was catching penny turtles out of the gully at Dinmore and selling them around the neighbourhood. That was when I was about 10. But that wasn't my first job. My first job was, I think, probably at harvest markets. I did it when I was about 14 to 15. That was just on a Saturday. I was still at school. So on a Saturday, it was 6 till 6, basically. So a 12-hour day for... I remember the pay the first day, $10. After school, moved to MBF in Brisbane for a short while to Thorn Furniture out at Raceview for some time, but then was signed to go play football in Townsville in the state league at the time. So that was 1980, late 80 that I was signed to go up there. Played 81, 82 up in Townsville, and while I was there, studied attained a Bachelor of Commerce degree from James Cook University. Also, whilst I was there playing football, managed to win the state league, so the highest level in Queensland, with Townsville in 1982. That same year, we also won the Ampol Cup, and we actually defeated Ipswich at Ebervale. So I was playing for a side 1,000 miles away. I was a 19-year-old, still a teenager, and I was playing for a side 1,000 miles away and won an Ampol Cup medal at my home ground at Ebervale. Then came back after the degree. The first job in 1984 was with Pete Marek Mitchell. That was a chartered accountancy firm in Brisbane. So I had a couple of jobs over a few years and moved out of practice into commercial accounting, and that was to Hardboards Australia at Bundamba. So I was back to Bundamba. And
you stayed there quite a few years.
Yeah, I was there for 12 years. So I started as a cost accountant, became the accounting manager, was transferred down to Oban in the Blue Mountains for a major expansion as a commercial manager of the entire site there. So there were about 500 employed down there. Was brought back to Bundamba again and became the factory manager for a couple of years. Then the group hardboards commercial manager across Australia. That was at the time that CSR owned hardboards, and it was part of the wood panels division of CSR. CSR at the time was, I think, number 3 in the top, certainly in the top 5 companies listed on the stock exchange.
Where and when did you make a connection with horse racing?
With my granddad. So I'd have only been 9. He passed away when I was about 10 or 11. So sitting beside him, he was he retired from the railways. He was a brickmaker and the brickie supervisor building all the brick sheds out at the Ipswich Railways workshop. He retired in about 1970, and he'd sit every Saturday afternoon and watching TV at Baval at the house and at Railway Street. And I'd be sitting beside him, following the horses along with him. A few years later, I went to the first Ipswich Cup that I'd seen in 1978. I saw Lloyd Boy win for Bart Cummings, the well-known winner of many Melbourne Cups, and I was kind of hooked on racing. Then I should take a bit of a step back. Back in 1971, so a few years before sitting with Grandad, I was at Bundamba Primary School. And so the fence of the school borders the racetrack. The night before, I was watching TV with my dad and saw this big grey stallion called Silver Knight, and I was showing him, talking about him, saying he's in the Melbourne Cup tomorrow, and I was a bit excited about that. And I thought, look at this magnificent big grey stallion. And then the next day, watching the race over the fence. Sorry, I was at the fence at Bundamba Primary School watching races at Bundamba. I didn't know where the Melbourne Cup was or exactly what it was. I just saw this big grey stallion.
Yes.
The particular race at lunchtime that day, on Melbourne Cup Day in 1971, so the first Tuesday in 1971, at Ipswich, at Bundamba, there were races on, and there was a big grey horse. I don't remember if it was a stallion or mare or gelding even, but I remember seeing this grey horse won by probably a few lengths and won pretty easily. And I turned to the kids beside me and said, that must be Silver Knight. It's just won the Melbourne Cup. And I got home and Dad said to me, Silver Knight did win the Melbourne Cup. And I said, yeah, I know, I saw him. Thinking that
it was the same horse.
It's the centre of the universe, Bundamba. So it must obviously, certainly the centre of my universe at that time, and so it must obviously be Silver Knight winning the Melbourne Cup because there's a grey horse and it's at Bundamba. So, I found out sometime later that in fact the Melbourne Cup is run at Flemington.
Some distance away.
Yes. So 1978. To go back forward again in 1978, I saw the Ipswich Cup for the first time. I was a 15-year-old. I just loved it. I just hooked on the excitement, the colour of horse racing, and I'd been hooked a bit by my grandfather's punting and the excitement of having a win now and again. And I remember I had a 20-year school anniversary dinner. It was held at the Val Bowls Club in 1997. And there were three, so it was asked of all of the school kids 20 years later, what have you done over the past 20 years and what do you intend to do over the next 20 years? The three things that I put on that, I just pulled it out a few weeks ago. We're starting to clean out the house at home, and I just pulled it out and saw it. And the three things that I put were that I'm going to do over the next 20 years are to purchase property on the coast, to do everything we can to help the kids out. So at the time, the kids were 7, 5 and 3 years old. Mm-hmm. Do everything we can to help the kids out and to get involved in the thoroughbred horse racing industry. With horse racing, it so happened that it was only 6 months later that we had a gymnasium. My wife and I had a gymnasium at Redbank Plains. It's still there. It was the squash courts and gymnasium. We'd run it for 5 years and it was becoming too much. So with kids 3, 5 and 7 years old, we said we'll get out of this and move to a farm, which we did out at Peak Crossing, and actually bred some thoroughbred horses out there. And knowing very little about horses beforehand, but we went out and
you learned fast, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Bought a few mares and bred a few horses and won a few races. So we named the horses after the kids. And there's Alex's Princess was probably the best of them, and then Ellen Loves Rose has won a race up at Gatton, and a horse called Tika's Blue Star, which was our middle daughter's. Tika's Blue Star won at Eagle Farm by 4 lengths and at Gatton, so won a couple of races. We bred all of those, and that one also raced on Ipswich Cup Day. It run about 5th on that day, but that was in 2004.
So the transition to GM of the Turf Club, how did that come about?
At the time, I'd been with Steggles at Woolkaraka. Over that time, the 4 years, we're out on the farm breeding horses, and obviously loving horses, involved with them. And the position at the Turf Club came up, and the things that they were looking for at that particular time were a financial acumen. So I'd been a CPA, certified practicing accountant, for 20 odd years at that time. A strategic mindset, and as I just said, back in '97 when I said here are my 3 goals, I've always been quite goal driven. That's one thing that suited me to a T, a strategic mindset. Also a passion for racehorses. So obviously I long had a passion for racehorses, and to be a local with a local understanding. So they were the 4 criteria that the committee were looking for at the time, which was obviously very clearly matched, very well matched to my situation, where I was at the time. And
Ipswich Cup Day is now the biggest regional racetrack event annually in Australia. When did it actually step up a gear to go from a largish event to the huge race day that we now know? It's
always been a large event. So relatively, compared around the place. So back in 78, when I went to my first Ipswich Cup, the years after that, after I finished school, and like the next 5-10 years, even though 20 years, I've been to every Ipswich Cup since that time, and it's always been the city of Ipswich have always supported that race day. At that time, through the last part of the 20th century, everywhere, like all of the regional race meetings were attracting, large crowds. At the turn of the millennium, around about that time, there are a number of things that happened to the industry with other forms of wagering competition, Foxtel coming on to TVs at home, so you could watch your races at home,
yes,
or in pubs and clubs right across the country. And then you've got your online betting that came in, and you've got sports betting, which is one of the other many other wagering. So casinos and pokies, especially in Queensland, they only came in late in the 20th century. All of those things came in, which made a great competition for the wagering dollar. In addition to that, it meant that the racetracks themselves had great difficulty attracting people to come to the races, because if you can sit at home or a club or a pub in air-conditioned comfort with a six-pack and eating what you like in your lounge chair, able to bet on your phone or online or however, there became less motivation to actually go to the races. And that's probably the main achievement in relation to the Ipswich Cup. It did continue growing, but it hasn't dropped off, as have other meetings across Australia. So when all of these things have hit, for those reasons, there have been many fewer people actually going to the races. Even the Melbourne Cup Carnival last year, across the 4 days, it was down to 250,000 people compared to 10, 15 years ago when it was 450,000 people. Or everywhere, the Cox Plate, except for when Winks was there or Mackay Diva, like great horses.
Yes.
But the Caulfield Cup, all the major races and even the regional race meetings, they've all dropped off because there's less incentive to actually go to a racetrack. So that's the big thing that we've done is to create, over that 15 years, to create a social event, obviously, for the people of Ipswich, and the people of Ipswich have strongly supported that. Basically asked over that time, and changed things up a bit, but asked over that time, what do you want? And the introduction of entertainment on the infield, DJ entertainment on the infield is probably a big example of things that have been done. When we first did that, we were almost being told to get out of town. How can you be putting musical entertainment
I remember
on
when you started
race
that,
meeting? Yes, and even back prior to that, if you go back to 2007, when one of the changes from early on when I was here was to move away from the culture of drinking as much beer as you can to turning it to more of an upmarket, fashionable, social day. One of the key problems with liquor licensing, well, the biggest problem with liquor licensing is underage drinking. It was impossible to manage underage drinking unless we actually said no underage people allowed at the Ipswich Cup, and that's what we did in 2007. In doing that, again, I personally was called the Ipswich Nitwit on the front page of a prominent racing newspaper for going with 18 plus status for the entire day. The racing industry couldn't understand at the time why aren't you letting children? Why are you banning the future generations from going to the race meeting? In hindsight, it was obviously the right thing to do. The kids of Ipswich, as they're growing up, they're seeing an Ipswich Cup and looking forward to being able to go to the Ipswich Cup when they turn 18.
Yes.
So there are a number of other tracks that did the same thing afterwards as well. After we'd done it, but it was the first. We were the first in Australia, and it was quite a bold step. I remember Richard Friedman on Sky Racing the next morning, the morning after the Ipswich Cup, saying, "What the hell's going on at Ipswich?" So I've just got an email here saying that it was an 18-plus event. How can you do that for a race meeting? And now that was one of the first steps in getting to the point where you have a sustainable day, a sustainable event, creating something that is going to entice people to, is attractive to people,
yes.
to a majority of to a large part of the market.
Mm.
And the day really is the community of Ipswich.
Well, sadly, there was no Ipswich Cup this year, but 2 key races did go ahead on the 18th of July. How has racing fared overall in this year of COVID?
Unexpectedly, very well. The main reason was in the 3 months around mid-March, we were locked down, so there were no patrons at the races up until July. So during that period, the racing continued, and the industry did very well to keep racing going during that time. Across Australia, there was no AFL, there was no NRL, no sports betting. There was no English Premier League football. There was no American basketball. So, as I say, unexpectedly, the wagering on racing right around the world increased dramatically over that time because there was very little other option. So even on Ipswich, the wagering on Ipswich from the US increased probably tenfold over that time.
Wow.
Yes, which had a couple of impacts. Firstly, it allowed the clubs, it allowed Racing Queensland to financially subsidise the clubs to keep them running through that period.
Mm-hmm.
So if we lose the Ipswich Cup, we're in a financial hole because it's the one big race meeting. All the rest across the year are midweek race meetings. What Racing Queensland did was to reduce prize money through the Winter Carnival and use that prize money to subsidise the clubs, not realising that they're going to get a significant boost in revenue to the tune of probably about 40% during the last quarter of the financial year. So they received that boost and were able to subsidise the clubs. So the clubs are in the same position they would have been if they had the races go. Racing Queensland are reporting a profit. And the second part of that is that you've got, for the first time in many years, you've got people coming back to racing for a totally unexpected reason. But COVID actually had people coming back to racing, and there's the opportunity, obviously, to capitalise on that for the industry to highlight the excitement, the colour, the glamour of the industry of the sport.
Brett, you've announced your retirement coming up next year. You'll no doubt be leaving on a high with the completion of the redevelopment of facilities there at Bundamba. I think something like 25 million's been spent. The new Events and Entertainment Centre is obviously the standout. It's a very different looking facility. What's been built, moved and renovated? Yes, okay. So there's quite a bit. There was 2 areas of expenditure. One was funded by the Racing Industry Fund or Racing Infrastructure Fund. That was project managed by Racing Queensland. So the club had little to do with that. But having said that, we're very excited with what we're left with. So, and the elements of that were the new Grange Lounge, which is the members' lounge on race day. It's over the top of new jockeys and stewards' rooms, which are beside a new kitchen. The new Grange Lounge can fit up to 300 people banquet style and 500 people theatre style. Perhaps the biggest lounge west of Mount Cootha. So that's the first element. There's a new bitumen car park that was required for that Grange Lounge. There's a new set of race day stalls, 124 stalls, state of the art. The racetrack itself has been the irrigation and drainage. So the drainage has been a long-term problem with clay underneath. Where you've got coal, you've got clay, and underneath the track, the clay has meant very little drainage. But there was a couple of $1 million spent in total on drainage and irrigation, and then the widening and curbing of T.L. Cooney Avenue out the front, coming off Brisbane Road. So each of those elements made up the overall project. There was also a roof put over the top of the Eyeliner Lounge, the old Eyeliner Lounge. Oh, yes.
Yes, so they were the elements that were done by Racing Queensland out of the infrastructure fund. In addition to that, the club has spent some of its own resources in and done a few things. So they installed a racing museum, an Ipswich Racing Museum, a children's playground, a chef's garden patch, introduced or built the Barn Family Restaurant from the original Taboon Lounge, which was built about 15 years ago. Upstairs, the old Eilong Lounge, it was built 36 years ago. It has been separated into a function room plus a separate sports bar called the Thoroughbred Sports Bar. So all of those elements, including as well as the Trackside Lounge, which has been here for 60 years, all of those elements now have joined to make the Ipswich Events and Entertainment Centre, which has something for everyone, and including racing, obviously, looking to appeal to families of Ipswich.
Well, there's no doubt it's a great addition to the racetrack and probably the most significant building period since horse racing began at Bundamba.
It would be, that's right, Alan. There have been different things. So back in 1984, when Russ Innes was the Minister for Racing, Loftus Foote was the chairman at the Ipswich Turf Club. That was when the Eilong Lounge was built at the back of the grandstand, and there were new race day stalls for the horses built at that time, as well as a kitchen and the beer garden. That was the biggest up until that time. So we've been racing here for 130 years at Bundamba itself. Mm. This one certainly is the biggest project and refurbishment over all of that time.
You must be tempted to stay a bit longer after overseeing such a huge upgrade, but when and how did you come to the decision that it was time to call it a day and go for that big R word, retirement?
Yeah. I've been thinking about it for a long, long time, and plan again, as I said earlier, quite goal-driven and planning for it for a long, long time. My father, Spencer, passed away a few years ago, but 25 years prior to that, he had a severe stroke, so he was 58 years of age, 58 and 2 months back in 1992. It was actually 4 days before our middle daughter was born that he had a severe stroke. The quality of life was shot after that. He very low mobility, and I looked at him at the time and thought, you've worked that hard all your life. You've achieved a lot with your family and your sporting activities, and you get to this point and you can't enjoy your retirement. Mm. And it was at that time I started thinking I don't want to go beyond 58. So with the same age. So
that's the number you chose.
58. Yeah, I turned 58 in February next year. It actually coincides with being able to access superannuation. And on the 1st of March, that is the last day of the pay week after I turned 58. So that's the date that I've chosen, and obviously given a lot of notice to the club to allow a smoother transition to the new person.
Yeah, exactly.
As we possibly can.
Brett, well, I'd like to wish you all the best in retirement, and thank you so much. You've been very generous with your time. So thank you for talking with Ipswich Today.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure, Alan. Thank you.
Ipswich Today is supported by Kinetics, people-powered web hosting trusted by Australian businesses since 1999. This podcast is also listener-supported. If you like what you hear, please make a once-only gift or regular donation to help keep it online. Just go to ipswichtoday.com.au and click the donate button at the bottom of the page. You can subscribe for free and share this podcast from your favourite app, including iHeartRadio, or play Ipswich Today from your smart speaker. Music is supplied by Purple Planet Music. This is Alan Roebuck. Thanks for listening.